What's up, everybody? Back for another album review, and this one is focused on the great New York death metal band that's been around, since from '91 for their initial release, Dawn of Possession. And I'm sure they were starting out back in the '80s too, similar to bands like Morbid Angel and that crowd, Deicide and whatnot, that became that second I guess you would consider the second wave of death metal if you considered Possessed and Death to be the first wave. But still, they're some of the originators of the old school '90s death metal, which is still as relevant today as has ever been. I think, even in the wake of all the more tech and prog influenced metal bands that are focused on super complicated riffs and drum pieces and hyper speed and just craziness, and that have shown the progression in technical and songwriting prowess among the death metal scene and extreme metal in general. But right now we're talking about old school '90s death metal, and like I said, Immolation, in a similar way to say like a band like Cannibal Corpse. They pretty much have stayed the course. They have their style, and they don't vary very too much from that style, which is for a band like Immolation is not a problem, because the style is awesome. They're pretty unique in their own little quirks and little aspects about their own the songwriting and how they approach the music and whatnot. So it's always been even in some albums that are not as solid as others, there's plenty there to sink your teeth into and keep you interested for the length of the album. And this is no exception with the newest album, Atonement. Solid, very pleased. The production is as good as it's ever been. I've always really liked the way that they've mixed the sound of the different instruments. I've always loved the drum tones. They sound way more organic than what you expect, or what you get with some bands that they use way too many. They trigger everything, and the kick drums sound like a keyboard, or not keyboard, or a typewriter, clickety clickety click. The snare always sounds like a machine gun type of sound. And yeah, I've always really I've always enjoyed the just the drumming and the rhythm section, and all the little ideas that are always going on, long. And it's not just straight up blast beats and stuff that kind of gets a little bit old. There's always kind of just little ideas, little fills and rhythm patterns and stuff that are keeping things interesting, instead of just kind of keep like if you're some of the guys will just they'll do a single stroke roll on the on the bass drums, and be playing on maybe something on the ride hat, or the ride cymbal, and then just keeping kind of the cadence with the snare while everybody else is playing. And sometimes it can get kind of boring. So yeah, definitely kudos for that. It's still there. The great drumming. Steve Shality is their drummer now. I think it was Alex Hernandez. Yeah, he was there for a while on the first album that I got, Failures for Gods. That was the first Immolation album I bought. So yeah, I mean, his style and the style that Steve is playing, now, they're similar. I think maybe that's just a decision by whoever the main writers are in the band, as far as the music goes, that they want to use that style. But I think it fits so well with the guitars and Ross's bass playing, and Robert's his solos and his lead stuff is I like, because it's a departure in a way from just trying to play more classical guitar solos, where it's kind of it's almost like necessarily a standout, where you just playing and you're just shredding and kind of just showing kind of your your prowess, but with Immolation, the lead always kind of, it seemed like it added layers to the atmosphere and the mood of the songs, in as much as it, created its own kind of musical space, So yeah, that's there. That's one thing I really like about Immolation, is they do create, this atmosphere or mood with a lot of their songs, with the way they arrange the pieces. So everything, it's this bludgeoning, pummeling in your face, no frills, no gimmicks, just steadfast and nose to the grindstone, which is something I really like about Immolation, because I know that when a new album comes out by Immolation, it's going to be solid. It's going to be worth at least checking out, and maybe certain songs will stand out more than others. But like last album's Kingdom of Conspiracy had plenty of good songs, and this one's no different. As far as particular songs go, I would say the second track, I believe, is When the Jackals Come. It's got a good guitar riff and hook breakdown kind of part, and not breakdown as in deathcore, but just kind of a little section where they're just kind of repeating this one guitar riff. That sounds pretty cool. Rise of the Heretics is another one. Destructive Currents and Atonement, I think, are the other two that really stood out. But yeah, there's not really any weak tracks. There's just maybe some that are a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more, typical of, I guess, I don't know, typical of a more generic Immolation track, or whatever you want to call it. But that's all good. I mean, you can, like I said, you can just throw on the album and listen to it from start to finish, and then start picking out, which jumps out at you the most. And another thing that I like about Immolation, as far as the guitars go, is that, which is a real huge pet peeve for me, is bands that either they don't know how to implement artificial or pinch harmonics in their songs, and it just it's almost like it's a punctuation at the end of each phrasing. You'll have a riff, in 4/4, and after that, first measure, and then they'll just it'll end on a squealed pinch harmonic, and then you'll get the same riff, and it's like over and over. If you want a good example of it, even though it's not necessarily a metal band, look at Danzig's work, after especially on Circle of Snakes. It's just it's so monotonous and just predictable, and it just doesn't sound that great. When people, like in a lot of these Immolation songs, on Atonement, they interweave pinch harmonics as an additional feature of the soundscape. It's far more creative, and they're one of the few bands that use quite pinch harmonics that I can point out as a band that does it well. And they change the tone of the note of the pinch harmonics, instead of just kind of coming out with the same thing that you other bands. Like I said, I've listened to so many metal bands that once I start hearing that pinch harmonic being used, kind of in predictable ways, it's just like it becomes a bit jarring. But yeah, I mean, you compare, if you want to see the difference between use of pinch harmonics in a more orthodox way and in a more creative way, listen to track 5 and then track 6, and you'll see the difference in the way that they're used, and you'll probably get my point. But yeah, if you're a fan of Immolation, and like I said, you probably don't need to get a recommendation from me. If you like their other songs in their discography, just pick it up, because it's gonna, what you're gonna get, and it's still solid. And if you're missed the I guess the old school death metal of the 90s, I started listening to death metal in the mid 90s. And want to revisit, and you're more used to what's the more technically adventurous and more extreme, and as far as the speed and dexterity of the playing and the craziness of the arrangements, and you want to kind of get a feel of what death metal was like back in the 90s. which is basically, once thrash and the Judas Priests and the Iron Maidens of the world kind of passed out of the popularity. That's when black metal and death metal weren't obviously hugely popular in the way that bands like Judas Priest were in the 80s, but that kind of became the torch being passed to those two styles. So yeah, it's a good reminder of what a great decade the 90s actually was for metal. People kind of poo-poo it because the big name bands, the Metallicas and the Slayers and Megadeths and whatnot, did put out some shitty albums. But yeah, this one is an example of what was going on back there that was good. All right, yeah, that's about it. Atonement by Immolation on Nuclear Blast Records. What a surprise. It seems to be Nuclear Blast or Relapse that's got the monopoly on the heavy metal scene. But yeah, go get yourself a copy of it, guys, and check it out. I'm sure there's got some sample tracks online on YouTube under their official channel. But yeah, you don't really need to sample it. Just go out and get it. You will not regret it. All right, everybody. Until next time, take it easy.